Europe is the new frontier for the South American crime cartels, while imports of Afghan heroin have never been so massive. The Mediterranean Sea is the crossroads of this deadly trade from east and west, creating new urgency to thwart this silent, lethal cargo. The globalization of crime has brought about an incredible intermingling of drug trade routes. Instability due to the failed war in Afghanistan has led to a 300% increase in the quantity of heroin hitting the European market. In the United States, the market is so flooded with Latin American cocaine that dealers have turned their sights to more profitable Europe. Never before has Europe been so awash with drugs. Much of it comes through the Mediterranean Sea via container ships.
Well, drug trafficking in general is an evolving profession for these criminals. And what they try to do is capitalize their profits. And one of the best ways they can capitalize their profits is to mitigate risk. And of course, risk is international law enforcement. So they're constantly looking for new routes, new avenues to get their drugs to wholesale markets and ultimately consumer markets.
The 'ndrangheta is capable of paying for a cargo even when that cargo is lost.
You guys are buying it. If you stop buying it, maybe the people in Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil and all the rest of it will stop selling it.
The drug smuggling routes follow the great trafficking highways which have changed over the years as criminal organizations have spread their web of alliances. The old tobacco and opiate routes from the east still exist, but new routes have opened up from the west as criminal organizations have expanded globally and exploited law enforcement loopholes to organize their trade. Not only drugs, but arms and people too. Italy has been at the forefront of Europe's battle against drug smuggling ever since Palermo in the 1980s became the capital of Europe's heroin production under the umbrella of the Cosa Nostra crime syndicate. The business was so profitable that soon other criminal organizations, the Camorra in Naples and the Sacra Corona Unita in Bari, also began using their ports to move drugs. Eventually, though, cocaine and the 'ndrangheta would supersede all the others. The Camorra and Cosa Nostra have today been largely sidelined by the notoriously violent Calabrian mafia, the 'ndrangheta, whose global reach has turned Italy into a central hub for the international trafficking of drugs and other lethal cargo, which of course no longer need to pass through Italy at all.
L''ndrangheta sicuramente ha sfruttato quello che inizialmente è stato il proprio core business, ovvero
The 'ndrangheta took advantage of what initially was the core business, the kidnapping of people. The investment in the cocaine market generated what is today a leadership in that market.
Sicuramente una leadership di questo mercato.
Probably when in Italy, more than the 'ndrangheta, there was a concentration on the other criminal organizations.
Su altre organizzazioni criminali.
But at the time, like they still do today, the 'ndrangheta was quietly expanding its networks not only in Italy and invested in this flourishing cocaine market and building personal relationships directly with the producing organizations.
Della cocaina, andando a intrecciare dei rapporti personali direttamente con le organizzazioni produttrici.
Drug trafficking is a global threat that has required law enforcement agencies worldwide to collaborate closely. Here in Brussels, the United States Justice Department runs a key office of the DEA directed by James Allen.
Yeah, originally, well, back in 2006, I was the regional director for DEA for the what we call Middle East Southwest Asia region, which included Afghanistan, Pakistan, all the way through Turkey and the STAN states. What we typically worked with our Turkish counterparts at that time was heroin trafficking, and heroin trafficking basically up through the Balkan route, which is a very traditional route through Romania, Bulgaria, up through Croatia, and then into Europe.
The Balkan route, once the hub for heroin trafficking of the 1980s and 1990s, is now changing. Once the Albanian gangs used the migrant crisis of the 1990s to get their wares into Italy, and from there to the big centers of Naples and Palermo. Heroin was sent from Europe to the USA. It was the time of the Great Mafia trials and the first contacts between the Colombian cartels and Italian organized crime.
What we've seen as we worked these massive organizations, mostly Albanian and Turkish, where they were not only using the Balkan route, but they were starting to use what we call the northern route, which is through the Stans and then into Russia and then trickling down into Europe, and also what we call the southern route, which is going down through Pakistan, across the Makran coast into East Africa, across to West Africa, and then up through Europe and sometimes the United States.
Smuggling in and out of Eastern Europe and the Balkans is still small scale, however, compared to the massive growth in the cocaine market. Cocaine is trafficked to Europe mostly by sea, often in container shipments. Colombia remains the main source of the cocaine found in Europe, but direct shipments to Europe from Peru and Bolivia without ever having passed through North America are becoming increasingly common. In fact, smugglers are increasingly using the hundreds of ports of the Mediterranean to smuggle vast quantities of cocaine into Europe. London is one of Europe's lucrative markets. The cocaine trade in the UK began 20 years ago.
And the first 1,000 kilo load, which was smuggled into Europe and smuggled in by a British crime group from Liverpool, they brought it in through Amsterdam, and they did that by flying over to Venezuela, making contacts with Venezuelan drug dealers. Then they came back to, and the drug dealer said to him, we will give you 1,000 kilos on tick, i.e. on credit, if you can get the transport from Venezuela to Europe. So they flew back, they bought a boat. They'd never sailed a boat in their lives. They sailed it to Cape Verde on a test run. They thought, yeah, we can do this. They sailed it to Caracas, or port in Venezuela. They picked up the gear, and then they sailed it right into Amsterdam. And that was the first 1,000 kilo load, which that and crime group ever did. Lots of other people in Liverpool watching this, and they thought, well, if they can do it, we can do it. So they all moved over to Amsterdam, and they did it themselves.
There are several ways cocaine enters the European market. Some big hauls have been uncovered in containers coming directly from South America, while others have been transported by mothership to the European or West African coast before being transferred to smaller vessels. Some cocaine is left as payment to West Africans for their assistance, which they then move on their own behalf, sometimes even by commercial air couriers. Gangs from Nigeria, who rely on a global web of Nigerian communities to ply their deadly trade, have found yet another way to take advantage of some of the most marginalized Africans who are caught up in the migrant crisis. The sheer size of Africa and a lack of any form of transnational policing makes drug trafficking nearly impossible to track. The world's leaders in drug smuggling, however, are Italian. Today, the largest criminal organization in Europe is the loose affiliation of Calabrian gangs and clans known as the 'Ndrangheta. The Italian finance police in Catanzaro is on the front line combating their terrifying power.
Qualunque organizzazione criminale fa del lucro, del guadagno, la propria ragion d'essere.
Every criminal organization exists to make a profit.
Le organizzazioni criminali di arrestare i partecipi alle stesse, di sequestrare i carichi.
Apart from destroying the criminal organization, arresting those participating and confiscating the cargoes of cocaine are not, I'd like to underline, are not the first objective. Our first objective is to build a picture of the criminal clan, identify its members, understand the roles, document its structure, and offer the judicial authorities enough investigative material to use in the trial as undeniable evidence, so as to deliver these criminals to justice once and for all.
Di dibattimento delle prove incontrovertibili al fine di assicurare alla giustizia in modo definitivo questi criminali.
The illegal drug market in Europe is worth 24 billion euros a year. These outlawed substances are consumed by millions of Europeans, and as their cost decreases, the market base widens. Cocaine is Europe's most widely used illegal stimulant, with an estimated 3.6 million people over the age of 15 having sniffed, snorted, or injected it in the last year. It is second in seizures, behind only cannabis. Cocaine is trafficked to Europe via both air and sea. The 'Ndrangheta has gained control not only of the supply side of the market, but also the places of import. Using the high seas to smuggle people, waste, arms, and drugs is a serious threat to international trade and regional stability, as over 90% of global trade is carried out by sea. The rip-on, rip-off method, which involves putting the illegal goods into the container and then taking them out once it arrives in port, substituting the shipper's seals, is increasingly preferred to traditional concealment. It is perfect for ports where corruption is rife. The Italian 'Ndrangheta has a man in every one of them.
Ancora oggi possiamo tranquillamente dire come l''Ndrangheta non solo sia egemone e utilizzi i porti.
Still today, we can easily say that the 'Ndrangheta is not only using the Italian ports with commercial routes from those countries, but also using commercial routes that involve American cargoes arriving in Northern Europe.
In porti, per esempio del Nord Europa, parliamo di Rotterdam.
Like Rotterdam, Germany and Holland, and then transporting the drugs by truck to the national markets. They also do business with other criminal groups in the drug market, for example, by getting it to arrive in Spain and then subdividing it between local Spanish criminal gangs and the part that then goes to the 'Ndrangheta.
Facente da far arrivare per esempio in Spagna e poi ripartirla quota parte per la delinquenza spagnola e quanto invece di competenza dell''Ndrangheta.
Well, again, you know, the drug trade is like any other business, and the traffickers, the South American kingpins, are going to move their cocaine to where they can make the most money. So throughout the years, at first, the markets were in the United States, where typically back in the 70s and early 80s, a kilogram of cocaine was going from anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000. Because they have flooded the market in the United States, now you can buy a kilogram of cocaine for under $15,000 in some parts of the United States. So these drug traffickers started to look for different markets because they flooded the United States market. So they saw that there was a ripe market in Western and Eastern Europe.